Hello, Mr. NDE narrator. I must tell you that this is a very emotional story to share. Even now, as I read through it one last time before sending it to your mail, I find myself in tears. Every word carries the weight of the pain Islam has cost me. Pain I still carry with me every single day. But I knew I had to share this. The world, especially those in Western countries, needs to understand the reality new Christian converts face here. They need to see the silent battles we fight and how much we depend on their prayers to help us stand strong. This isn't just my story, it's the cry of countless others who are still trapped, still suffering. My hope is that this will awaken hearts and move people to intercede for us like never before. My name is Mariam Alonzo. I am 50 years old from Manila, Philippines. I was born into a wealthy family that gave me every opportunity to live a comfortable and exciting life. My father was a successful businessman with investments across Southeast Asia, and my mother came from a line of respected educators. We lived in Makati City in a grand house surrounded by luxury cars, house help, and security guards at the gate. From a young age, I attended private international schools where my classmates were the children of politicians and tycoons. I was taught to speak English and Tagalog fluently, with a little Arabic from our religious studies. My parents made sure I lacked nothing. Weekends were spent at malls, high-end restaurants, or flying out to Singapore and Hong Kong for shopping trips. I never thought life could be any other way. I was a young girl wrapped in privilege and possibilities. Despite being Muslims, my family was not overly strict. We fasted during Ramadan, attended prayers at the mosque on Eid, and celebrated Islamic holidays, but outside those moments, religion rarely dictated our lives. My father believed in hard work, education, and modern values. He admired the West and often said, "We can be Muslims but still live in the world." My mother wore a scarf sometimes, but it was a personal choice. She encouraged us to dress modestly, but never forced us to cover our hair. As a teenager, I wore jeans, sleeveless tops, and even went swimming with friends. Islam to me was more of a tradition than a way of life. It was there in the background, but never a heavy weight on my shoulders. I never imagined faith could become a weapon or a cage. Our home was filled with music, laughter, and television shows from the United States. It felt normal, and I believe this was how most Muslims lived. At university, my world expanded even more. I enrolled at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, a place known for its diversity and intellectual freedom. I was ambitious, aiming for a degree in business administration so I could one day help manage my father's companies. I loved my classes, my professors, and especially the vibrant campus life. I joined organizations, attended parties, and made friends from all walks of life. Marriage was the last thing on my mind. I was focused on my education and enjoying my youth. But everything changed when I met Reza Hosseini, a foreign student from Iran. I first noticed him during a group presentation. He stood out with his tall frame, neatly kept hair, and polite demeanor. His accent gave his words a musical quality, and his calm, thoughtful way of speaking intrigued me. He wasn't like the loud, boisterous boys I had known. Reza seemed older, wiser, and more respectful. Our friendship started with simple conversations about our project, but it quickly grew into something deeper. Reza often stayed behind after class to talk, asking about my family, my dreams, and my favorite books. He spoke about Persian poetry, ancient architecture, and Iranian culture in a way that made me curious. I asked about life in Iran, and he smiled, saying it was a land of rich history and kind people. He never mentioned religion or politics, and I never thought to press. In fact, he praised the Philippines for its openness and freedom, saying he loved how women here could pursue education and careers without fear. I found myself drawn to him, not just for his looks, but for how he made me feel seen and respected. Soon, our coffee breaks became study dates, and our study dates turned into dinners. By the end of the semester, we were inseparable. As our relationship deepened, I began to believe I had found a rare kind of man. Reza was attentive, thoughtful, and never controlling. He admired my independence and often told me I was unlike any woman he had met. When he saw me in jeans or without a headscarf, he never criticized me. Instead, he complimented my confidence. He seemed to embrace modern life fully and even joked about how strict some of his relatives in Iran were. "I'm not like them," he would say with a laugh. "I believe in freedom." When he proposed to me, I didn't hesitate. I felt safe with him. My family welcomed him warmly. My father was impressed by his education in engineering, and my mother appreciated his quiet manners. To them, he was the perfect son-in-law, Muslim enough to share our faith, but modern enough to fit our lifestyle. Our wedding was a grand affair held in Manila, attended by family and friends from both sides. As I stood by his side that day, I believed I was stepping into a beautiful future. About a year after our wedding, Reza came home one evening with exciting news. He had been offered a prestigious job with a top engineering firm in Tehran. He spoke of it with enthusiasm, saying it was a chance for him to provide a better future for us and any children we might have. "It's only for a few years," he said. "Then we can decide where to settle." At first, I was hesitant. I loved my life in the Philippines. I couldn't imagine leaving my parents, my friends, and everything familiar. But Reza was persuasive. He assured me Tehran was a modern city with shopping malls, parks, and universities. "You'll love it," he said softly. "It's not as strict as people say. You'll see." I wanted to support him and believed his promises. In the end, I agreed, telling myself it was only temporary. I packed my bags with a mix of excitement and nervousness, holding tightly to the belief that our love could withstand any change. On the day we left Manila, my family gathered at the airport to say goodbye. My father hugged me tightly, his eyes filled with concern. "Take care of yourself, Anik," he whispered. "Remember, you can always come home." My mother kissed my forehead and handed me a small pendant with Allah's name engraved on it. "For protection," she said gently. I smiled, not realizing how much I would come to cling to those words in the years ahead. As Reza and I boarded the plane, I looked out the window at my beloved city, unaware that I was leaving behind not just my home, but the life I knew. The first thing I noticed as the plane touched down in Tehran was how different the air felt. It was cold, heavy, and carried a strange stillness that I could not explain. Looking out of the small oval window, I saw rows of women dressed in black chatters walking quickly across the tarmac, their heads bowed as though they carried invisible weights on their shoulders. When the plane doors opened, I stepped into the terminal, clutching my husband's arm as my nerves grew tighter with every step. Reza smiled at me and whispered, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it." But as I looked around, I felt an uneasiness growing in my chest. The large portraits of Ayatollah Khomeini hanging from the walls seemed to watch me, their stern eyes following my every move. There were no advertisements for beauty products or Western brands, as I was used to seeing in Manila. Instead, the walls were filled with religious slogans in Persian and Arabic. Leaving the airport, we drove through the streets of Tehran at night. The city lights flickered faintly, but there was no joy in them. The streets were crowded, yet quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Women walked in groups, their long black garments flowing like shadows. Men gathered in tea shops or walked with their heads high, while the women trailed behind them. I pulled my scarf tighter around my head, trying to hide my face, even though I wasn't sure why. Reza noticed and said softly, "You're beautiful. Don't be afraid." But I could not shake the feeling that I had stepped into another world entirely, one where my beauty might not be a blessing, but a reason for danger. We reached our apartment building, a gray concrete structure that felt cold and unwelcoming. Inside, I unpacked my bag slowly, trying to convince myself that this was only temporary, that soon I would adjust. But deep in my heart, I already felt the walls closing in. It didn't take long for me to understand how different life was for women in Iran. My first trip outside alone was met with stares from strangers. The morality police, known as Gashti Irshad, patrolled the streets, stopping women whose headscarves slipped too far back. or whose coats didn't cover enough of their shape. One afternoon, I saw a young woman being pulled into a police van while her mother screamed helplessly. Her crime? A few strands of her hair showing beneath her scarf. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the scene over and over. Reza reassured me, saying, "As long as you follow the rules, you'll be fine." But following the rules meant erasing everything I had known about freedom. I could no longer laugh loudly in public, or wear jeans without a long coat covering my legs. Makeup became dangerous, drawing unwanted attention. I began to walk with my head down, avoiding eye contact, afraid of accidentally provoking someone's anger. Inside our home, I expected Reza to be the man I married, the one who had admired my independence and encouraged my dreams. But he was changing too. He no longer spoke of freedom or equality. Instead, he embraced the strict laws and traditions of his homeland. He prayed 5 times a day without fail, his prayers growing longer and more intense. He started attending Friday prayers at the mosque regularly and inviting religious scholars, men with long beards and stern faces, into our home. Their conversations in Persian, which I struggled to understand, often included words like Sharia and obedience. Slowly, Reza began to correct me in small ways. "Mariam, pull your scarf forward more. Someone might see you. Don't laugh so loud, it's not proper here. Why do you want to go out alone? Stay home where it's safe." At first, I protested gently, but his tone grew sharper each time. "This is not Manila," he reminded me. "This is Iran. Women must know their place." The man I had fallen in love with seemed to fade away, replaced by someone I did not recognize. I missed the Reza who had admired my confidence and called me his equal. Now he expected me to ask permission before leaving the house. He criticized my cooking for not being traditional enough and scolded me for playing Western music too loudly. I felt like a bird trapped in a gilded cage, beautiful but helpless. I started to dread his footsteps in the hallway, unsure if he would come home smiling or frowning. I tried to remind myself of his good qualities, the man he had been in Manila, but it became harder each day as his lectures about modesty and obedience grew longer. 2 years into our life in Iran, I gave birth to our first son. Reza Jr. holding him in my arms, I felt a surge of love and hope. Maybe this child would give me a new purpose, a reason to stay strong. A year later, I had our second son, Samir. My boys became my world. I poured all my love into them, telling them bedtime stories of my life in the Philippines, stories filled with sunshine, beaches, and laughter. But as they grew, I saw their father's influence shaping them. He took them to the mosque, taught them Quranic verses, and warned them about the corruption of Western countries. I tried to balance his teachings by whispering words of kindness and freedom to my sons when we were alone. But I feared it was not enough. My sons were learning to see the world through their father's eyes, and I felt powerless to stop it. By now, I had stopped writing letters to my family back in Manila. I didn't want them to know how miserable I had become. I smiled in the photos I sent, hiding the truth behind perfect poses and polite words. But inside, I felt empty. My dreams of starting a career, of traveling the world, had vanished. The woman who had once walked confidently through Manila's crowded streets was gone. In her place was a quiet, obedient wife and mother who lived each day carefully, afraid of making a mistake that could bring shame or punishment. I began to understand what it meant to be a woman in Iran, not just to live, but to survive. A phone call came late one rainy night. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after putting the children to bed, when the sharp ring made my heart skip. I wiped my wet hands on my apron and picked up the receiver. A man's voice, low and hesitant, spoke in Persian. Though my understanding of the language was still limited, I recognized enough words: accident, hospital, come quickly. My hands trembled as I called out for Reza's cousin, who lived 2 floors below us. Within minutes, he and his wife were rushing me to the hospital. The drive through Tehran's dark, wet streets felt like a dream. Rain pounded the windshield, and I clutched my scarf tightly, praying silently. When we arrived, a doctor met us at the entrance. His face said everything. Reza had died instantly. His car had skidded on a slick road and slammed into a concrete barrier. There was nothing they could do. Sitting in the sterile waiting room, I felt numb. Tears didn't come at first. My mind was blank, my body frozen. The man I had loved, the father of my children, was gone in a heartbeat. Memories flashed in my mind. The young man in Manila with the gentle smile. The husband who had slowly turned cold and strict. The father my sons adored. Grief hit me in waves, but beneath it was something I didn't expect. A faint sense of relief stirred in my chest, and I hated myself for feeling it. But it was there, undeniable. For years, I had lived under Reza's shadow, my life dictated by rules and fear. Now, with him gone, a small voice whispered inside me, "You are free." The thought scared me, but it also lit a tiny spark of hope in my heart. In the weeks that followed, I mourned Reza in public as expected. Neighbors and relatives filled our home, offering condolences and quoting Quranic verses about Allah's will. I wore black, kept my head down, and accepted their words with quiet nods. But when I was alone at night, lying in our bed, I allowed myself to dream. Dream of a life where I could make my own choices, speak my mind, and live without fear. My sons, Reza Jr. and Samir, were too young to fully understand their father's death. They cried for him at night, and I held them close, whispering words of comfort I barely believed myself. But deep down, I made a silent vow. I would not let them grow up like their father. I would not allow Iran's oppressive system to mold them into men who saw women as less. It was not an easy decision, but it felt necessary. I began to plan a future for my sons that looked nothing like the one their father had envisioned. Using my inheritance from my father in Manila, I started exploring ways to send them abroad for their education. I wanted them to see a world where freedom was not a crime, where women could walk with their heads held high, and where faith was a choice, not a weapon. The United Kingdom became my focus. It had strong universities, a diverse culture, and opportunities that Iran could never offer. Some of Reza's family members objected when they heard of my plans. "It's too far," they said. "They will lose their faith. They will forget their roots." But I stood firm, using the excuse of better schooling and their father's dream of giving them a bright future. Inside, I knew it was about saving their souls and their minds. Sending them away was both the hardest and bravest thing I had ever done. The day I watched them board the plane to London, my heart felt like it was being torn in two. They were still so young, but I trusted the British education system to shape them into men who thought differently, who valued justice and equality. I prayed they would not return with the same rigid views their father had held. I prayed they would remember the lessons I whispered to them in secret about kindness, empathy, and courage. Back in Tehran, the house felt empty without their laughter and footsteps. But I knew I had made the right choice. It was time to focus on the next step of my journey. With my sons safely abroad, I turned my attention to the women around me. For years, I had watched neighbors, friends, and even strangers suffer under the weight of Iran's restrictive laws. Women were beaten for showing their hair, denied jobs for refusing to wear the chador, and silenced when they spoke out. I could no longer stand by and do nothing. Using funds from my inheritance, I began organizing small, secret meetings in my home. At first, it was just a few women, wives, mothers, students, gathering to talk about their struggles and share ideas. We spoke in whispers, afraid of being overheard, but our determination grew stronger each day. I taught them what I knew about human rights, equality, and how women in other countries fought for their freedom. Together, we began to dream of a better Iran, even if we knew we might never see it ourselves. Our movement grew slowly but steadily. We connected with others through discreet networks, always careful to avoid the attention of the authorities. The risks were enormous. At any moment, a neighbor could report us and we would face arrest or worse. But fear did not stop us. It only fueled our resolve. I used my resources to provide books, safe spaces, and even small amounts of financial help to women who needed it. For the first time in years, I felt alive again. I was no longer just surviving. I was fighting for something bigger than myself. Every meeting, every whispered plan, every act of defiance was a step toward reclaiming the voice that had been stolen from me. The underground movement I started had grown in ways I never imagined. What began as quiet meetings with a handful of women in my living room soon became a network stretching across different neighborhoods in Tehran. We communicated in whispers, passing notes hidden in bread baskets or inside children's school books to avoid the watchful eyes of the morality police. Sometimes we met in basements or behind locked shop doors after hours, always checking first for informants. My inheritance from my father allowed me to fund small projects, helping women escape abusive marriages, providing legal advice, and even paying bribes to get young girls released from detention. I had found my purpose in helping others reclaim their voices. Yet I also lived with constant fear. A single mistake could lead to prison or worse. But each time I saw a woman smile again after years of suffering, I knew the risk was worth it. During one of these secret gatherings, I met a group of women who seemed different from the rest. They spoke about courage and hope in a way that was deeper than just fighting for rights. There was a piece about them that caught my attention. Their leader, a soft-spoken woman named Layla, had an inner strength I could not explain. She carried herself with calm confidence, even though she too had been arrested and beaten for opposing the regime. One evening, as we shared tea in hushed voices, Layla mentioned following Jesus as the reason she could endure so much pain without losing hope. Her words startled me. Jesus? In Iran, we were taught he was only a prophet and nothing more. I avoided eye contact and changed the subject. I had too much on my plate to consider religion again. My focus was on women's rights, not faith. But something about Layla's serene smile stayed in my mind long after that meeting. Over the next few months, I kept encountering these underground Christian believers. They were cautious but open-hearted, never pushing their beliefs on anyone. I watched how they treated one another with kindness, respect, and a love that felt genuine. Even in hiding, their joy was unshaken. They risked everything, beatings, imprisonment, even death, yet they never seemed afraid. I began to wonder how they found such peace in a country where fear ruled every street. One evening, as we sat in a dimly lit room with blankets stuffed under the door to muffle sound, I asked Layla, "Why are you so calm? Don't you fear what they might do to you?" She looked at me with gentle eyes and said, "Because my life belongs to Jesus. They can hurt my body, but not my soul." Her answer confused me, but it also stirred something deep within me, a longing I could not name. At first, I resisted learning more. My memories of Islam were heavy with rules, punishments, and fear. I wanted nothing to do with another religion that might trap me again. But over time, my curiosity grew stronger. I started asking questions during our secret meetings. What makes Jesus different? How can you be so sure of his love? They spoke of a God who cared for women, who did not see them as second class or as property. They shared stories of Jesus defending women in the Bible, lifting them up instead of silencing them. I listened quietly, my heart torn between doubt and hope. Was it possible that God could be like that? A father who loved unconditionally, not a master who demanded fear. Their words were like drops of water on dry soil, softening the hard places in my heart. One evening, Layla gave me a small book wrapped in brown paper. "Read it when you are alone," she whispered. It was a Persian translation of the New Testament. I hid it carefully in my home, waiting until the children were asleep to open its pages. As I read, I felt emotions I hadn't known in years: comfort, warmth, even joy. The words spoke of love, forgiveness, and freedom in a way the Quran never had for me. I read about Jesus healing the sick, forgiving sinners, and calling women his daughters. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I read, not from sadness, but from a strange, unfamiliar sense of being seen and loved. It wasn't long before I confessed my growing faith to my elderly mother, who had been living with me since my father's passing. She had endured her own quiet suffering under Iran's laws, and though she remained strong, I knew she carried deep scars inside. When I told her about the Christians I had met and the peace I felt reading their book, she didn't scold me. Instead, she reached for my hand and said, "Perhaps this is the truth we have been searching for all our lives." Together, we began attending the secret gatherings, sneaking out under the cover of night, our hearts pounding with fear and anticipation. Months later, Layla asked if we wanted to be baptized. The thought terrified me. Baptism was a declaration of faith, and in Iran, it was considered apostasy, punishable by death. But I couldn't deny what I felt. Jesus had already changed my heart, and I wanted to follow him completely. One cold night, in a basement with only candles for light, my mother and I stood barefoot in a tub of water. Layla prayed over us, her voice trembling with emotion. As the water poured over my head, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. It was as if years of fear, shame, and pain were being washed away. When I opened my eyes, I saw my mother smiling through tears. For the first time in years, we felt free. Not free from Iran's laws, but free in a way no regime could ever take from us. The day my sons returned from the United Kingdom was one I had long dreamed about. Years had passed since I watched them board that plane as boys. Now they were young men. I stood at the airport in Tehran, my heart pounding with anticipation as I scanned the crowd for their faces. I imagined embracing them and whispering words I had rehearsed in my mind for years. Words about love, faith, and the freedom I had found in Jesus. I pictured us sitting together, sharing meals and laughter, and slowly revealing to them the new life I had chosen. I prayed silently as the arrivals board blinked with their flight information. My hands trembled not with fear, but with hope. I believed they would understand. I believed my sons, raised for years in a Western society, would see the truth as I had and embrace it with open hearts. When Reza Jr. and Samir finally emerged from the crowd, my breath caught in my throat. They were taller, stronger, and more confident than I remembered. But something about their eyes made my stomach twist. There was a hardness in their gaze, a sharpness that had not been there before. They hugged me politely, but it felt rehearsed, not the warm embrace of sons returning to their mother. As we drove home, I tried to fill the silence with cheerful chatter about their childhood memories and the things they missed in Iran, but their responses were curt, their smiles strained. I brushed off my unease, telling myself it was the long flight, the exhaustion. I resolved to give them time to settle before sharing my faith. Surely, once they were rested and saw the joy in my life, they would ask questions. Surely, they would want to know what had brought peace to their mother's heart. Over the next few weeks, however, my unease grew. The boys spent most of their time in private online chats or meeting with a small group of friends from university. I began to notice patterns in their conversations, references to true Islam, disdain for Western culture, and praise for scholars from the Middle East. I overheard them quoting Quranic verses in stern tones, their words laced with conviction and fervor. At first, I tried to reason with myself. Perhaps they were just reconnecting with their roots, trying to understand their identity. But deep inside, fear began to grow. Could it be that my efforts to protect them from the oppressive system had failed? Had they embraced the very ideology I had fled? One evening, as we sat together at dinner, I tried to open the conversation gently. "Tell me about your life in London," I said. "Did you make good friends? Did you see much of the world?" Reza Jr. looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. "We saw enough," he said flatly. "Enough to know the West is corrupt and dangerous for Muslims." Samir nodded in agreement. "We were warned, Mother. They want to destroy Islam. We saw it firsthand." My hands trembled as I reached for my glass of water. This was not what I had expected. The sons I had sent away to be free thinkers had returned with hardened hearts, their minds consumed by the same ideology I had fought to escape. The moment of confrontation came sooner than I had planned. One afternoon, Reza Jr. stormed into the living room, holding the small New Testament I had hidden in a drawer. His face burned with anger. "What is this?" he demanded. Samir stood behind him, his arms crossed, his expression equally cold. "Are the rumors true, Mother?" he asked. "Have you betrayed Allah? Are you working with the enemies of Islam?" My mouth went dry. I had no words. I had wanted to tell them gently, to explain the journey of my heart and the peace I had found. But now, my secret was laid bare in the harshest way possible. I stood frozen as my sons, my own flesh and blood, looked at me not with love, but with contempt and betrayal. The room felt heavy with silence after their outburst, their accusing eyes fixed on me like sharp blades. I tried to speak, my voice trembling. "My sons, please listen. You don't understand. I found peace, love, and a truth that changed my life. This isn't about betraying you or Allah. It's about finding the God who loves us all." But my words only deepened their scorn. Reza Jr. slammed his fist on the table. "Stop. You've been poisoned by infidels. You've disgraced our family, our faith, and our father's memory. Do you know what people will say if they learn of this? Do you know what the Quran commands?" Samir's voice was colder. "You and grandmother must repent, or we will have no choice but to cleanse this shame." My heart pounded. These were my children, boys I had nursed and raised, but in their eyes, I was now the enemy. Days passed in tense silence. The boys spent hours locked in their rooms, typing furiously on their laptops and whispering on encrypted calls. I knew enough to understand they were reaching out to their online Islamic networks. Their words during arguments had revealed it. They were in contact with groups of radicalized peers from Iran, Pakistan, and other Middle Eastern countries. These communities praised martyrdom, shamed families who allowed apostasy, and celebrated those who restored honor through blood. One night, I overheard Reza Jr. on a call. "Yes, we will do what must be done. Allah's will must prevail." My blood ran cold. I wanted to believe they were only angry, that their words were a threat born of hurt. But deep down, I knew their fanaticism had taken root too deeply. I could feel the walls of my own home closing in, the air thick with unseen danger. My mother sensed it too. She moved quietly, her frail hand shaking as she prepared tea. "Mariam," she whispered one morning when the boys had left, "they are planning something. I can see it in their eyes. We must leave." I held her trembling hands and tried to calm her, but I had no answers. How could I run from my own sons? Where would we go? Every neighbor could be an informant, and the morality police were everywhere. But escape felt impossible. That night, as I lay in bed, I prayed like never before. "Jesus, please save us. Cover us with your protection. Show me a way out." My prayers felt urgent, desperate, yet my heart was gripped by dread. The attack came suddenly one evening. I was in the kitchen helping my mother when the door burst open. Reza Jr. and Samir stood there, their faces twisted with fury and resolve. "You've left us no choice," Reza Jr. said, his voice cold and distant. "The elders said this is the only way to cleanse the shame you've brought." My mother gasped, her hand clutching her chest. Samir stepped forward, a long kitchen knife glinting in his hand. "Repent now, or we will send your souls to Allah." I froze in place, my mind racing. Was this real? Could my sons truly harm us? I reached for my mother, pulling her behind me, but before I could speak, Samir lunged. My mother screamed as the blade sank into her chest. She collapsed to the floor, her blood spreading across the tiles like a terrible crimson river. The sight of my mother's lifeless body broke something inside me, but instinct took over. I shoved a chair at Samir, sending him stumbling backward, and bolted for the door. Reza Jr. shouted, "Stop her. She cannot escape." I ran down the narrow hallway, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor, tears blinding me. I could hear their footsteps pounding behind me, their voices shouting Quranic verses about punishment for apostasy. My lungs burned as I pushed through the door and into the night. The streets were eerily quiet, the air sharp with winter's chill. I didn't dare scream. I ran like a hunted animal, darting into alleyways and back streets, praying with every breath. Jesus, save me. Hide me. Deliver me from their hands. Somehow, by a miracle I cannot explain, I made it to the home of a woman from our underground network. She took one look at my blood-stained clothes and pale face, and without a word, pulled me inside. For days, I hid in her basement, barely sleeping, barely eating. My body shook with grief for my mother, with terror for my own life, and with heartbreak over what my sons had become. They had killed their grandmother in cold blood, and I knew they would not hesitate to kill me too. Messages came from trusted friends, warning me that my sons had posted online about their honor cleansing and that radical networks were praising them. My picture had been shared in secret forums, labeled as an apostate to be hunted. The days I spent hiding in that basement felt like years. Each creak of the floor above sent my heart pounding. Each distant sound of boots in the street made me freeze. I barely slept, barely ate, consumed by grief for my mother and fear for my life. My sons were out there, and I knew they would not rest until they had finished what they started. The woman sheltering me whispered about safe routes out of Tehran. There are people who can help, she said, but it's dangerous. You must decide quickly. I nodded, my hands trembling. Staying was no longer an option. My mother's blood was still fresh in my memory, and I knew my only chance at survival was to flee Iran. I prayed constantly in the darkness, whispering, Jesus, show me the way. If you save me once, save me again. Arrangements were made in whispers and hurried notes. I would travel by night, avoiding checkpoints and patrols, moving from house to house with the help of Christians who risked their own lives to save mine. My final hours in Tehran were spent staring at the walls, remembering the life I once had. The elegant home, the laughter of my children, the hope of raising them free, all of it gone. When night fell, I wrapped myself in layers of black fabric, hiding my face, and stepped out into the cold. The streets seemed deserted, but every shadow felt like eyes watching me. We moved quickly, slipping through alleys and side streets, hearts pounding with every passing vehicle. Twice we were stopped by plainclothes officers, but my escort spoke calmly in Persian, offering bribes and excuses until they let us pass. I kept my head down, praying they would not look too closely at my terrified face. At the border, we waited for hours in silence, crouched in a hidden compartment of a delivery truck. My legs cramped, and my heart felt like it would burst from my chest. The driver whispered, if they search too deep, stay still. Don't breathe too loud. I clutched my pendant, the one my mother had given me before we left Manila, and repeated the name of Jesus in my mind. When the truck finally began moving again, I allowed myself a single, shaky breath. I didn't know where I would end up. I only knew I was leaving behind everything, my home, my memories, even my sons. But I also knew that staying would mean death. Hours later, we crossed into Turkey. I was free, but the cost felt unbearable. In Istanbul, I stayed in a safe house for weeks while arrangements were made for me to return to the Philippines. Each day felt like walking through a fog. I mourned my mother, murdered by the very grandson she had loved. I mourned my home, now a place of danger and betrayal. Most of all, I mourned my sons, not the ones who tried to kill me, but the little boys I had once held in my arms, the boys I had tried so hard to protect from this darkness. I wondered if there was still hope for them, if someday they might remember the lessons I whispered to them at night and choose love over hate. But for now, I had to let them go. The pain of that realization felt like a knife twisting in my heart. When I finally stepped off the plane in Manila, I felt both relief and emptiness. My family welcomed me with open arms, their tears falling freely as they saw the haunted look in my eyes. I collapsed into my father's embrace, sobbing like a child. The city felt loud and alive compared to Tehran's suffocating silence, but I could not feel at home. I had left too much of myself behind. Some nights I would wake screaming, my mother's face in my dreams, or the cold eyes of my son staring down at me. But even in the darkness, I felt a presence, gentle yet strong. Jesus had carried me out of Iran, and I clung to him now more than ever. I spent hours reading my Bible, finding comfort in verses about God's protection and promises of new life. Slowly, my wounds began to heal. Now, as I sit in my small apartment overlooking the Manila skyline, I reflect on my journey. From wealth and privilege to fear and loss, my life has been torn apart and rebuilt piece by piece. I lost my husband to a cruel accident, my mother to an act of hate, and my sons to a belief system that turned their hearts to stone. Yet through it all, I found something far greater than I ever imagined. I found a faith that gave me peace even in the darkest nights. I found courage I never thought I had. And I found hope not just for myself, but for every woman still trapped in the shadows of oppression. To every woman who hears my story, I say this: you are stronger than the chains around you. You are more precious than the lies they tell you. And there is a God who sees you, who loves you, and who calls you by name. His name is Jesus, and he is the light that no darkness can overcome. I am living proof that even in the face of betrayal, violence, and loss, his love can bring you through. Don't give up. Don't let fear silence you. Your voice matters. Your life matters. And there is always a way forward, even when the world says there is none. To every mother watching this, especially my Muslim sisters, I beg you, open your hearts to Jesus before it's too late. I know the fear you live under, the pressure to follow rules that steal your freedom and your children's innocence. But I am telling you this as a mother whose heart has been shattered. I raised my sons with love, hoping they would grow into kind men. But Islam, the very faith I thought would guide them, turned their hearts to stone. They became blind to love, blind to compassion, and even blind to the bond between mother and child. My tears could not stop their hands, and my prayers in the name of Allah went unanswered. It was only the name of Jesus that saved me. I don't want your story to end like mine, with blood on the floor and your children lost to darkness. Please, my sisters, I beg you to ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. I know it feels dangerous. I know it feels impossible. But I promise you, he is waiting with open arms. He does not come to condemn, but to save, to give life where there has been only fear. I found peace when I said yes to him, and I know you can too. If you love your children, give them the greatest gift a mother can give, the knowledge of a Savior who loves them unconditionally. Don't let them be taught hatred. Don't let them be poisoned by lies that twist faith into violence. Your prayers in Jesus' name can cover your children in ways you never imagined. And to every Christian watching this, I beg you to raise your children in the way of the Lord. Teach them his word. Plant it deep in their hearts while they are young. Do not leave their faith to chance. The world is filled with voices pulling them away, voices louder and stronger than ever before. If you do not give them the truth, someone else will give them lies. Don't let them grow up without knowing the love of Christ and the power of his Spirit. Lead them by example. Show them how to pray, how to forgive, how to love even their enemies. You are their first teacher, and the seeds you plant today will bear fruit for generations. Finally, I ask all of you, pray for my sons. Their names are Reza Jr. and Samir. Pray that God will touch their hearts, that the hatred and anger inside them will melt away in the light of Christ's love. Pray that the same Jesus who saved me from the hands of my own children will rescue them from the darkness they are trapped in. I still believe in miracles. I believe my sons can be redeemed, and I hold on to the promise that nothing is impossible for God. Please, lift them up in your prayers. And as you do, remember all the families still living under oppression, still searching for hope. Together, we can bring light into the darkest places.